All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our look at March of the Machine Aftermath previews. This is our second video. This is going to be focused on the legendary creatures from the set that were not former Planeswalkers. So we're going to look at those now. But before we get started, special thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring our videos and this look at March of the Machine, the Aftermath. So let's get started. So first we have Tazri, Stalwart Survivor. For 2 and a white mana, you get a legendary creature. It's a human warrior. That's a 3/3. And this is from Zendikar, Tazri is. So, and she has an interesting ability that each creature you control has add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. Spend this mana only to activate an ability of a creature. Activate only if this creature has another activated ability. So kind of the wording there is a little bit weird. But I think what they're really trying to get at is the creature has to have an activated ability already, and then obviously all of the creatures get this one, so it has to be an ability in addition to this one that they have. And then Tazri, for 5 mana, 1 of each color, you can mill 5 and put all creature cards with activated abilities that aren't mana abilities from among the milled cards into your hand. So basically it's a mill 5, put as many creature cards as you have, because this is obviously a card you would want to build around with creatures that have some kind of activated ability. And as a result of that, you would be building the deck that way. Now, I don't know if there's a critical mass of creatures that are good enough for this ability right now in Standard, but we'll have to see if there is going forward. Next, we have Arnie Metalbrow. I'm going to take on Arnie from the Kaldheim set. For 2 and a red. You get a legendary creature who's a human berserker and who is power and toughness and is 3/3. So whenever a creature you control attacks or a creature enters the battlefield under your control attacking, you may pay 1 and a red. If you do, you may put a creature card with mana value less than that creature's mana value from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. So basically what this is saying is you can pay 2 mana to put a card with any kind of mana value you want, but it has to be less than a particular creature that's attacking. So let's use Arnie as an example. If Arnie's attacking, you can put a creature onto the battlefield for 2 mana. That's 2 mana. Now the upside of this is you can do this obviously at instant speed, so that's an advantage of the card. But I think really to take advantage of this has got to go into a more of a big red deck where you've got some 4 and 5 drops that you can attack with, and then those would allow you to pay 2 mana to put some 3 and 4 mana creatures into play. Otherwise, I don't see really a home for Arnie unless a big red deck does form. It's an interesting ability, but again, it's one that probably most of the red cards you're going to play are already 2 mana or less. Next, we have Plarg in Nasiri. For 3 and 2 red mana, you get a legendary creature that's an Org Effort and as a 5/4. And at the beginning of your upkeep, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. An opponent chooses a non-land card exiled this way. You may cast up to 2 spells from among the other cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So basically in Standard, this is at the beginning of your upkeep, each player is going to give you a card that you would then potentially have the ability to cast, and then your opponent gets to decide which one of those you in essence get to cast. So they're going to obviously be going for whichever is the weaker of the 2 cards that you could be able to cast. Now, I think this has more commander playability because obviously you're playing with 4 players, and then that would give you 4 cards to look at, and you would be able to cast 2 out of 3 spells, which I think makes it very good in Commander, but probably not there in Standard. Next, we have Danitha, New Banalia's Light. For 1, a green, and a white mana, you get a legendary creature. It's a human knight. So another knight for our potential knight deck as we move forward. That's a 2/2. She has Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink. And once during each of your turns, you may cast an aura or equipment spell from your graveyard. So equipments and auras that go into your graveyard, you can recast those. Now, right now we really don't have an aura or an equipment deck. Now, I did talk about Nahiri being a very good card for equipment-based decks. So there's a possibility that you might go red, white, and into blue a little bit to get this added ability of being able to cast things from your graveyard if they were to creatures were to die and they're enchantment creatures, you could cast those spells from your graveyard to get them back, which is a nice ability. So I think there's some synergy here, and the question is there enough synergy between Nahiri and Danitha to help form a deck around the two? And we'll have to kind of see where the deck goes to figure that out. Next we have Jarina, Dauntless General for a white and a black mana. You legendary creature. It's a human soldier. That's a 2/2. And when Jarina, Dauntless General, enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. So I think this as a sideboard card makes a lot of sense, because anytime you can exile your opponent's graveyard, that's a good thing. Particularly with Atraxa and other reanimation targets around right now. Atali obviously being another one that is a huge target of reanimator decks. So I think because of that, Jarina is a good card to have in your sideboard. I don't know if she's main deckable, even though she's a soldier. I'm not sure if that's enough. But in a humans deck, she might be enough, potentially, to matter here. And you can also sacrifice Jarina. And if you do, humans you control gain hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. So not only does she, when she comes into play, get rid of your opponent's graveyard, but then she has that ability to protect your entire team from a board wipe by giving it indestructible. So I think those are really good abilities. But again, I think right now it's more of a sideboard card than a main deck card. And really the reason is because it's in black, and most of the soldier cards we have are either in white or blue, and some in red that we're kind of bringing in, and potentially green even with King Darien the 47th as an option there. So I think, as we build more within the soldiers deck, if a build comes into play where you would go Esper colors, then I think she might have a place in the main deck. But I think really this is more of a sideboard card when it comes to standard. Next we have Joriel, Voice of Zalfir. For 2, a blue and a green mana, you get a legendary creature. It's a human druid. That's a 3/3. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, up to one target land you control becomes an XX green and blue bird creature with flying and haste until the end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. It's still a land. Whenever a land creature you control deals damage to a player, draw a card. So I think, right now we really don't have a Simic deck in standard, but if one develops, I can see this as a card that would help get some damage across early in games. You play this on turn 4, and then you go to combat. One of your lands then becomes a hasty bird creature that can attack, and you can do some additional damage that way and get to draw cards. So I think there's playability there, but I think, again, the issue is there a deck that's going to want this particular color pattern in standard? That's going to be the bigger issue. Next, we have Nashi, Moon's Legacy. For a black, a green, and a blue mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a rat shaman. Nashi's 3/4 with menace and ward 1. And whenever Nashi Moon Legacies attacks, exile up to one target legendary or rat card from your graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy. So the nice thing about Nashi is it's a way to get cards out of your graveyard. But again, it's in a color set that we really aren't seeing in standard right now. We're seeing decks that are black-green with red and the Grixis colors, or we're seeing the Esper color pairs, but we're really not seeing this particular color set. So I think because of that, at least right now, Nashi's not going to have much of a home in standard, even though it does have a powerful ability. And because of the critical mass of legendary creatures that we have, we're getting 20 more here with this set. Certainly, I think it's possible to create a legendary deck that would be in these colors. Next, we have Niv Mizzet Supreme. For 5 total mana, 1 of each color, you get a legendary creature. It's a dragon avatar and a 5/5. Niv Mizzet has flying and hexproof from multicolor. Each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard that's exactly 2 colors has Jumpstart, which means that you may cast that card from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other cost, then exile it. So we've got a number of these 5 mana cards that are in 1 of each color. We've got Joda, we've got the Invasion of Alara, we've got the Kami War. So there is potentially a place for Niv Mizzet in one of those decks because they're already, meeting the mana requirements. But the other side of it is how many different 5-drops can you put into one of those decks? Now, the good thing here is, again, Niv Mizzet's a dragon, so possibly the dragon deck might have a little bit of interest in the card. But again, we have to have a way of producing the white and the green mana if we end up in Grixis, or if we end up in Izzet, we'd have to have a way to generate white, black, and green mana. So I think those limitations are going to make it harder for that to get into the deck. But again, we do have all the tri-lands from Streets of New Capenna, so I think meeting that requirement wouldn't be overly difficult for the deck. So I think if a dragon deck does form, maybe the top end is Niv Mizzet. Next we have Pia Nalaar, Council of Revival. For a red and a white mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human artificer, and 2/3. With Thopters you control have haste. Whenever you play a land from exile or cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Okay, Pia really would fit into a deck that's using cards like Reckless Impulse, which is a red spell that exiles 2 cards. We got Render's Resolve that does the same thing, that exiles cards and then you can play them. And there's a number of other red spells that do this as well. So I think there's potentially a critical mass of stuff that would work with Pia Nalaar to create a deck, but I don't know if for standard right now if it's good enough to want to build around Pia, just given what we already have in standard. But it's an interesting card because I think there is that ability to exile stuff and cast those things, play them, and then create a bunch of 1/1 colorless Thopter to artifact tokens. And that could be very powerful to the point where it could win games for you. Next we have Rocco, Street Chef. For a red, a green, and a white mana, you get a legendary Elf Druid. That's a 2/4. And at the beginning of your end step, each player exiles the top card of their library. Until your next end step, each player may play the card they exiled this way. So it's kind of a weird ability. So it's basically an extra draw for both sides in the game. But what makes it less problematic for your deck is whenever a player plays a land from exile or casts a spell from exile, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and create a food token. So basically the benefit for you is if your opponent casts that spell, you get a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and you get to create a food token, which you can sacrifice then to gain 3 life. So I think that in and of itself is good enough to warrant consideration. But again, is there a deck that particularly would want this card? And right now in standard, I don't see a deck that would want this. We do have a humans deck in these colors, but again, he's an elf, so that makes it a little bit problematic. Next, we have Sigarda, Font of Blessing. For 2, a green and a white mana, you get a 4/4 legendary creature that's an angel with flying. And it has some important abilities. First, other permanents you control have hexproof. The card I want to kind of bring to your attention that is similar to this is Skrelv. But Skrelv, you have to pay mana and tap to give hexproof to a creature. Sigarda does it naturally. So like Skrelv, where you have to kill Skrelv before you can kill other things, you have to kill Sigarda before you can kill other things. And unless you're playing a black deck that is capable of just killing a creature, or a few of the white spells that are capable of just killing a creature, in green and in red and in blue, it's going to be much harder to accomplish that. So I think there's a place for Sigarda in Standard. Certainly in, we've got an Angel tribal deck that looks like it's coalescing. So I think in that deck, it certainly is something that, players would want to see. But more importantly, other green-white, the Selesnya color decks, might want this as kind of a top end, as a way of protecting your stuff from instant speed removal, and overall then having a nice 4/4 beefy body that you can attack in with. Okay, now in addition to that, you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast angel spells and human spells from the top of your library. So where we've seen Sigarda in the past is in the humans deck as kind of a top end, and obviously the one from Innistrad Midnight Hunt gives all of your humans +1/+1, so that's a great ability. But this gives, again, that hexproof, but it also now gives you the ability to cast things from the top of your library that are angels and humans, and that's a pretty powerful ability to have on a card. So I think this is something that those decks will want to look at to put into the deck as a way of protecting their creatures, but then also as a way of in essence, getting additional card draw by looking at the top card of your library and, oh, that's an angel, I can cast it now. And I think that is really helpful. And that's our last card for our legendary creatures. So thanks for watching our video. Thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring it, and our look at the legendary creatures that were not former Planeswalkers from the set. And we'll be back with 3 more videos, one talking about just the regular creatures from the set, another talking about the enchantments, and then a final one on the instants and sorceries from March of the Machine, the Aftermath. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.